All right. Hello, everyone, to everyone who's already here. I see a couple of folks have already joined us. We're going to give it one more minute for people to join, and then we're going to attempt to start promptly at 7 p.m. because we have a real full agenda tonight. Okay, it's 7 o'clock, so I guess we can get started. I'm sure people will start trickling in. Welcome everyone to our Solutions for Future Flooding webinar, and also happy first day of Black History Month. I know there are many exciting initiatives and events happening this month, and CRW will also be sharing some of the things happening across our watershed in our upcoming newsletter. So if you guys aren't already signed up to receive our newsletter, you can do so on our website. All right, so my name is Deirdre Johannes. I am the Urban Resilience Advocate with CRWA, and tonight I will be your moderator. So this is tonight's agenda, and as you can see, we have a full program where I will start off with some introductions, followed by our speakers for tonight. Note that we will have a Q&A session at the end of the program as well. So before we get started, I do want to remind folks that we are using the Zoom webinar format. This means that only the panelists are visible on this platform. We cannot see your video, and other attendees cannot see you either. All participants are also muted. And I know sometimes folks get really curious when they're in a webinar about how many other people are in the same webinar. I know our registration count for this webinar tonight came up to 130, which is a pretty good number. And I can see a good number of those folks have already joined us tonight, plus those that are joining us via live streaming on Facebook as well. So tonight, if you have any questions for the panelists, you can drop it in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen at any time. You can also chat with the hosts and panelists if you experience any technical issues. My colleague Julia is ready behind the scenes to assist anyone who's having any issues with Zoom tonight. And also a reminder that we will be running polls during the webinar. And so if you're not too familiar with polls, the polls will pop up as an extra screen on Zoom, and you'll be able to respond and select your answers on that pop-up screen. You also have the option to turn on live captioning, which you can turn on by selecting for live transcript at the bottom of your Zoom screen and then select for English. The webinar tonight is being recorded, and you will receive a follow-up email with the recording of the webinar to the email you registered with. And the recordings that we'll have from this webinar will also have subtitles in Spanish. All right, so to start off, for those of you that are not familiar with our organization, Charles River Watershed Association, or CRWA, is an environmental nonprofit working to protect, restore, and enhance the Charles River and its watershed through science, advocacy, and the law. We were founded in 1965 by a group of residents who did not accept that the Charles couldn't be cleaned up or restored. We are one of the oldest watershed organizations in the country. We work with federal, state, and local governments on various different projects related to the watershed. We have an interdisciplinary group of staff who help run our program areas, which include river science and restoration, stormwater solutions, and climate resilience. And if you're thinking, what is a watershed? Well, a watershed is any area of land, when it rains or snow falls on it, it will drain into a common body of water. So in our case, that would be the Charles River. And the river actually starts all the way up in Hopkinton over here, and it runs north towards Boston and the harbor. And as an organization, we take a watershed scale view of what happens in our watershed, because what happens upstream doesn't stay upstream. And so these 35 towns in our watershed are interconnected, which is why today's topic on regional approaches to climate change impact is so important. And as we talk about our watershed, I do want to take a moment for a land acknowledgement. We acknowledge that the Charles River watershed resides on occupied territory of the Massachusetts, Nipmuc, and Wampanoag tribes. We acknowledge the legacy and trauma that have been inflicted upon the Indigenous communities in our watershed. We also acknowledge that a land acknowledgement is not enough, and we continue to learn, grow, and listen to Native voices as we advocate for a resilient future. And with that, I will introduce our speakers. So our first speaker of the night, Hartman Dietz, is a Mashpee Wampanoag who has been active in environmental and cultural stewardship for over 20 years. This stewardship is based on his spiritual foundation and his native traditions that value the earth as a living being. Dietz is also returning to his work with the Wampanoag Language Reclamation Program as a student and a teacher. Dietz is a traditional artist as well as singer and dancer, having shown his art in galleries from coast to coast across the US. He's currently working with the Wampanoag Language Reclamation Project and as a creative director for a stage performance set to show this April in the UK. Dietz is currently engaged with advocacy work for the Charles River Watershed Association, advocating for the health and restoration of the Charles River, as well as other campaigns around Native rights to access waterways. Julie Wood is a longtime member of CRWA staff, having joined the organization in 2007. Julie manages the Charles River Climate Compact, a regional partnership of watershed municipalities focused on climate resilience. She is the project manager for the Charles River Flood Model Project, which is what you will be hearing about tonight. Julie has a BA in mathematics from Boston College and a master's in environmental science from the University of Massachusetts, Boston. Claire Rondelli currently serves as a conservation agent and open space planner for the town of Natick after spending 4 years in the conservation office of the city of Newton. She dedicates her time to educating the residents of Natick about wetlands, stormwater, invasive species, and all things environmental, and has greatly enjoyed being a municipal representative in the CRWA Climate Compact while working in both Newton and Natick. She has worked on several climate plans and projects in both communities and is a certified sustainability professional through the Institute of Sustainable Infrastructure. Claire has a bachelor's in environmental science from Northeastern University. Our last speaker for tonight is Lee Munier, who works with communities responding to extreme weather, or CREW. She coordinates projects like the Charles River Flood Model and has volunteered with them since 2018, both as an organizer for their annual Climate Interface Summit and member of local CREW chapter in Somerville, Massachusetts. She's had the honor of serving her community in many capacities: public education, songwriting and performance, community organizing, grants management, and even ecological landscaping. She feels most joyful and in flow when she gets to be creative, curious, and connected to nature, and when she can support others in accessing these as well. With the stellar Flood Model project team, Lee coordinates much of the community engagement efforts with her eye and heart on ways to engage people throughout the watershed authentically, equitably, and through mutual learning. And just a reminder to all of the speakers, I will be keeping track of time and will switch on my camera to signal that you have 1 minute left in your time before we have to move on to the next speaker. And before I pass it off to Hartman, we are actually going to run our first poll question. So our first poll question for tonight is, are you concerned about flooding in your community getting worse with climate change? And have you been personally affected by flooding? All right, answers are coming in pretty quickly. I'll give it another minute or so. Okay, so answers to poll number 1, everyone who answered said yes to the first question, that they are concerned about flooding in the community. So this webinar is a very relevant webinar to all of you. And then for question number 2, have you been personally affected? Most of our participants tonight has been affected by flooding. Thanks, Julia. And with that, I will pass it off to Hartman.
Wanina Khan, good evening. Nataswis Hartman Dietz, Nutamas Masipia, Nin Masipi Wampanaak. So, hello, my name is Hartman. I am from the Mashpee Wampanoag tribe. I've been working with Charles River Watershed Association for most of this past year. But it's great to see something like this come together, and this this webinar I think can get some good information out. Thanks to the whole umbrella network there, community responses to extreme weather. Certainly a very keen reality for many people. My daughter is currently living in Northern California, the Bay Area, so I've gotten to see, the extreme flooding that they've been experiencing this last month. I've gotten to see that through her eyes and through the eyes of other family members out there, and just really, really can be truly devastating when you get these huge deluges of water coming down on us. And the thing was, with this climate change that we're experiencing, the weather patterns that we're used to, they are not the same. They used to call it global warming, but of course we're seeing how much more complicated this whole thing is than just simple global warming. It really is a real disruption of the whole system that we've come to count on, to depend on. That's why we're having spring-like days here in Boston in January, able to walk outside in a t-shirt. This isn't the world that we've grown up with. This is something new. But for Wampanoag people, we've been here 12,000 years, and we've gotten to see a lot of changes in this land, and changes in the climate. We've lived through a mini ice age here. We were here when the icebergs, or the glaciers, I guess I should say, were a mile thick, covering the land. Before Cape Cod was sand that got pushed up from the bottom of the ocean bed. We got to watch the bays and the estuaries form. We got to see Nantucket and Martha's Vineyard get separated from the mainland with water. Water is a huge presence through our territory, and and through any place where you've got the ability to live as human beings. So as Native people, we have stories, and we have things that we're able to pass down, and we've been able to see these changes happen over millennia. So in that, we've witnessed a lot, and these stories that carry down, they hold lessons. And if you go up the Connecticut River, further west from here, you'll come across a large mountain or hill, and they say is the Great Beaver, they call it. And this actually comes out of our stories about water, and about the rivers, and about how these things are interconnected. So these stories, they hold truths, and they're they are stories, but they have lessons in them as well. And this particular story of the Great Beaver is relevant to how we deal with the land, and how we deal with the water, and how we deal with the rivers. And as the story is told, we talk about these times long ago when the world was shaping and changing, and we relate things in ways that are somewhat metaphorical and somewhat supernatural. And There's a story of a huge giant beaver, so big that when they killed this beaver, it became that mountain, became that hill. So this is the scale that they were talking about, giants. And we talk about giants that are actually in the land, is they help shape the land as well. Giant people, giant human beings. And in that, we had a giant Hobomok. And Hobomok was the giant that lived out in the central Massachusetts area. For us on the coast, Wampanoag people, the local giant that we had was called Moshop, and there's stories of how he waded out into the water and emptied the sand from his moccasins and made Martha's Vineyard in Nantucket. How he was carrying rocks in his apron and fell in a hole, got his foot stuck in a hole, and when his rocks got flung out of his apron, those formed the Elizabethan Islands. But this story is about, of course, the Great Beaver and how that hill became what it is today. And these giants, they looked after the people. They took care of the people. They showed them how to live in the world, as our predecessors, as our our forebears. These giants showed the people how to hunt, how to farm, how to find medicines, how to do all the different things that they needed to do to survive. And we look to them for help. Oftentimes, as children might look to their parents for help. And this huge giant beaver, ended up going up this Connecticut River. And as beavers do, it created a huge dam. It dammed up the whole Connecticut River, the mighty Connecticut River. It dammed it up, and the water grew higher and higher and higher. And next thing you know, the river downriver was barely flowing at all. The fish weren't coming upstream. They didn't have enough depth of water to swim through. And then on the other side of the dam, the villages there were complaining because their farms and their farmland in their villages were being flooded, filled up with water. So the people of the area started to come out, and they started to ask Hobomok, their giant, come and help us, Hobomok. We need your help. This giant beaver has managed to make it impossible to live. Impossible because we need the fish to be able to feed our families. We need to be able to have dry land that we can get to so that we can sow our crops. And none of this is possible because this beaver has managed to block off the whole river. And so Hobomok went up there, and he had to fight with this beaver, because nothing is just simply going to give up its home. So when he had to encounter this huge giant beaver, they thrashed about and they crashed and laid waste to many different things in the land. As they're both huge giants. He'd have to throw them around, and eventually he was able to break the dam through, which sent huge waves of floods down the river and just washed out everything below the dam, and became catastrophic with timbers and stones and everything washed away with the water as well. And he eventually was able to manage to kill the beaver, and as its body was laid where it was, it turned to stone over time and became that mountain. And that was how things were restored for the people to be able to farm and to be able to have the fish come upstream again. Now, this is a old story. It's a simple story, but it speaks to a real truth of an understanding that comes from the people who've been able to witness what happens in this land. And there's an understanding that when you block off these waterways and you create these imbalances, that something has to happen, something has to change to bring that balance back. And because this beaver was so huge and this dam was so huge, when it eventually let loose, all this destruction carried up carried away down the river as well. The greater the imbalance, the more destructive power is going to come to restore the balance when it comes. And that's unfortunately, I think, where we are today as humanity. We're looking at these destructive forces that are coming to try to reclaim and regain the balance of how our world works. And because these things are all interconnected, whether we choose to abide by that or not. This doesn't change. So, when we think about, you know, how we're going to interact with these rivers and, the trees, the land around us, the air we breathe, um, whether we're going to go mining mountains for cobalt and lithium, so we can have an iPhone or something like that. We have to understand that there's always a price to pay, some kind of balance that has to be restored. Um, and this will come at a greater and greater price the longer we ignore it. For those of us who've even taken a really basic look at the science of climate change, we can see back in the 40s and 50s there was an understanding of what would happen. Many of the scientists that started to really tackle the subject and start to do the studies back then about carbon in the atmosphere and what impact that will have on our world, they created models of what would happen. And if you look at them, they are terrifyingly accurate, other than the fact that these predictions are coming faster and faster than what they expected. And this means for us more flooding. This means for us more rain and heavy downpours, more extreme weather this way and that, whether it's the drought or the flooding, whether it's the heat or the cold, these things are going to get further and further from center. And it's like a metronome. And it's, you want to sort of click evenly, but the way we have things going, the balance is so far off that these clicks are going greater and greater. And this is what creates this destruction. And we need to be able to look at how these things function. These rivers, they're like the arteries of this living earth, the blood flow. And if we block these rivers up, it's like clogging your arteries. It's like having too much cholesterol or a blood clot or something like that might cause a heart attack of some sort. And this is what we see with the flooding. This is what we see. It even impacts the drought as well, because where the water is gone from one place, it shows up in another. And this is, of course, the story of the beaver even talks about the fish trying to come up the streams and how that there isn't enough water flow for them to swim up to the stream, up to the head of the river. And this is vitally important to so many species of fish that do their spawning, the herring, which are culturally important to us as native people, but many other different kinds of fish as well. They depend on this flow of water to be able to move that water back and forth into these estuaries, into these really rich biodiverse regions where we can have so much that we depend on to keep this world in balance. It's not just us as human beings that live here. We live with these trees. We live with the bushes and the grass and the corn and the beans. We live with the deer and the turkey, and we live with the fish and the sharks and the whales, and all these things together make a world. And yet, as human beings, we seem to have forgotten that we're only a part of this, not the end all be all. We see the Exxon is finally getting taken to account for the lies that they've been peddling for so many years, that this is not the truth. It's just the natural cycle of things that we see. But for Wampanoag people, we've been here 12,000 years, and this is not the natural cycle of things. Even through the ice ages, this is not the natural cycle of things. So we have to stop. We have to ask ourselves what changes need to be made, and how we're going to be able to restore this balance in a way that doesn't destroy everything that we have made, that we have living, because we have to make the effort and we have to do the work. And the balance isn't going to come back to itself unless it comes back in very destructive ways. So if we want to hold that off and we want to see this balance restored in a way that doesn't destroy us, we're going to have to roll up our sleeves and do the work. So with that, thanks for joining us. I know we've got more of the hard science and more of the actual plans that are going to be laid out to deal with these issues. And for that, I guess we're going to turn it over to Julie up next. So thanks for joining. Take care.
And thank you, Hartman. What wonderful themes to kick us off. Balance and, you know, thinking on a time scale that I know I, for one, am not used to thinking on. So that was wonderful. And then I love your closing thought on time to do the hard work to restore some of that balance. So that is going to get into my presentation. I'm not as good of a storyteller as Hartman, so I am going to use some slides to aid me here. All right, and the, oops, sorry, hit the wrong one. There we go. Thumbs up, Julia, you can see those? Excellent. All right. So just bringing us back to the watershed map that Dira already familiarized us with. But I am talking about a regional project tonight and a regional approach to one of the primary challenges that we are going to face with climate change, which is flooding, stormwater and riverine flooding. So there are so many things. So much bad news, I guess, is a really quick way of saying it. So much bad news that we see about flooding, heat, drought, other issues, of course, human health, other impacts that we understand are coming from climate change. And there are many, and it can just feel really overwhelming, especially when you see news like this, you know, every single day pop up on your phone. So we're focusing today, as you probably saw, on solutions. What can we do? What actions can we take? So I'm going to be really digging in on a project, an initiative that CRWA has been leading for almost 2 years now, where we're really trying to find and implement solutions. So the project involves what's called our Charles River Climate Compact. You can see our mission statement there. It's a regional partnership of cities and towns in our watershed focused on climate resilience. We're actually just wrapping up a strategic plan for the group, separate from Charles River Watershed Association's strategic plan, a strategic plan for the group. I think some of you responded to a survey we had out for that strategic planning process, so I appreciate your responses on that. And we should have something to launch on that strategic plan soon. So the Climate Compact membership are our partner cities and towns. The Charles River Flood Model Project, which Dira already mentioned, is a project of the Charles River Climate Compact. So you can see the list there are the towns that are currently participating. As I said, this has been an ongoing initiative, so we've had towns join and leave the initiative depending on their resources and availability. So this is our current group of communities that we're working with. The goal of the project is to understand flooding and understand what we can do about it. It is extremely important that we take a regional approach to flooding because, as we learned from Hartman's story, what happens upstream affects the downstream communities. So through the project, we've developed concept designs for numerous flood mitigation projects, some at the site scale, some at the neighborhood scale. We're really working to engage the community, understand what residents would like to see change as we adapt to climate change. Because we do need to change. This means you know, things might look different when we look out the window. Things might look different when we drive around our cities and towns. Are these going to be things residents like, embrace, appreciate? And Lee's going to be talking more about that, our community conversations. We've also been conducting culvert assessments. Culverts are where streams intersect with roads. So it is a necessary infrastructure, a necessary intersection of human infrastructure and nature. So it tends to be an early place where you do see conflicts. So we've been working on finding those. Ultimately, we are going to publish a Charles River Climate Adaptation Flood Mitigation Plan. We intend to publish this in June of 2024. So it's going to be a long planning process. We really want to get out into the communities, really want to hear from people, really want to hear from you, your neighbors. And so we're sort of letting folks know today, but just know that we will be coming back with more questions and more opportunities to have you provide input. So the Charles River Flood Model, you've heard me say that a few times. What is it? The Charles River Flood Model is essentially a computer model of the watershed that we can use to tell us where and when it is going to flood when it rains. So we developed it in 2021. We've since updated. We're going to work on some more updates again in the coming year. Keep it current, add detail. As I said, it shows flooding under present day and future climate projections under different storm scenarios. All the results are available online. This is a screenshot of what you can see online. You can turn on different storms, check out, you know, zoom in on your neighborhood, take a few minutes to explore that. It shows flooding by depth and location, and it covers the watershed from Newton and Watertown upstream. Okay, so I said this, we've been doing this for almost 2 years now. What have we learned? If you did not catch the WB article from last November, I would love you to Google that now because it was a great write-up. Well, not right now. You can wait till we're done with the presentation. It was a great write-up of some of the work we've done and some of our findings, which I will try to quickly summarize here tonight as well. But future flood risks are going to be significant. This probably makes intuitive sense, but communities that are downstream and communities that are highly developed will be the most impacted. Flooding is primarily an issue when floodwaters impact human infrastructure, roads, buildings. Flooding in a natural space is a natural occurrence. There is no one project that's going to solve this problem. We're going to need multiple solutions and approaches. As I've already said, regional collaboration is critical because the problem may be in a different area than the solution. It may be in a different town than the solution. It may be miles upstream. The solution may be miles upstream than where the problem is. So we really all need to be in this together. And we have some time. Maybe you noticed the last slide, I was looking at that 2070 storm. That's not tomorrow, but we need to get started. There's a lot to do, so we need to get started. Just zooming in a little bit more granular detail on some of the things we found. In addition to be able to just modeling storms, we can use the Charles River Flood Model also to model solutions. So we can find out what works. That's extremely helpful if a solution is going to cost many millions of dollars. You can test it out, see how effective it is before you invest that many millions of dollars. So that's what we've done. I'm just going to highlight two really quick. One, this first one, modeling scenario NBS 1A. That's how it's not super intuitive. That's how it's called out on the website though. So if you check that out, this was one of the solutions we tested. So looking at green stormwater infrastructure, things like rain gardens, to store runoff from about a 4.5-inch rainstorm, a pretty big rain event. So it would store runoff from half the impervious cover in the watershed. And then just to orient you to this graph here, The green is current day with no action. That's about the flood volume we'd see. So that's today. The dark blue is future. And then the light blue is if we take this action. So you can see it certainly brings the flood volume down. It does not bring it down to current day, but it starts bringing it down. It starts taking a piece off of that. The next one I wanted to dig in on, a little bit different, not quite a solution, but still a lesson learned. We looked at if we really developed a lot more of the watershed. So if 15% of the land that is currently undeveloped but not protected is developed, again, same thing, green is today with no flood mitigations, dark blue, future, no flood mitigations, and then the light blue is just things getting a lot worse from this, development that isn't taking flood mitigation into account. So we can do things that can make it better. We can do things that can make it worse. All right, super quickly, I see my time is coming to an end. What is to come? So from now through June, we're gonna focus on finding some more site scale solutions. Through our past work, we've identified some previous ones in Waltham and Medway and Newton. We're going to be looking for more. We may be coming to a community near you. Make sure you sign up for CRWA's River Current so you can hear about any upcoming meetings on those. We'll have another online event similar to this in June. We just like to keep folks updated on what's going on about every 6 months. And then after July, we're really going to start hitting the ground on that updated watershed flood plan that I mentioned. So we're also going to be looking to engage folks in that. And as we transition to Claire, I think we have our second poll of the evening. So I'll stop my share. All right, great. Thank you, Julia. So this is to get folks thinking. These are some of the kind of questions we're going to be coming to you as we do our planning and community engagement. So poll question, what do you think is the most important thing to consider when identifying and designing flood reduction projects? Excellent. All right, answers are coming in. All right. Oh, still coming in. All right, just got a big jump. Oh, great. Good participation. All right. Excellent. All right, 80% participation. That's great. All right, great. So it looks like our tops are the ability to actually implement them and get them funded. Super important. The ability to protect critical facilities. And third place, provides or protects important natural habitat. Great. All right, thank you all so much. With that, I will hand it to Claire.
Thanks, Julie. I am going to spend a little bit of time this evening speaking with you all about how this type of work impacts individual municipalities. I've been a member of the Charles River Climate Compact for 6 years now, in both Newton and Natick as a municipal representative, and have been with the flood project since its beginning. And Natick is lucky enough to be the financial lead on the current phase of the flood project through the MVP grant program. This work really provides a great framework for prioritizing municipal green infrastructure and natural solutions to deal with flooding and climate impacts. Having a real scale model that can show how different scenarios in different locations throughout town will impact flooding on a long-term basis is a tool that serves us not only now, but in the future. The tool continues to adapt as we do these different phases of work. And it really serves as a way to help municipalities not only prioritize projects for capital infrastructure, but to support project grant applications, and also to help communicate with the public the importance of these types of investments in our communities. In Natick, there are a number of locations that experience flooding on a regular basis due to the buildup of infrastructure during a time when stormwater management and flood mitigation and wetlands protection were not a focus in our communities. And because of that, our town center MBTA commuter rail station floods on a regular basis with pretty much every 10-year or larger storm that we get hit with, because a channelized stream with an undersized culvert is taking in too much runoff from the streets of Natick Center, and it doesn't have the space to hold it. We are not the only community that suffers from these problems, and a number of problems face communities on both sides of the line. They happen right on the borders, where they can often be more difficult to deal with. One of the things that I'm really excited to see in this phase of the grant project of the flood model is this sort of multi-municipality focus on where can we implement solutions to have a benefit on a larger sort of impact scale. Natick and Sherburne share a culvert that runs right under Route 27 or South Main Street, right near the Sassamon Trace Golf Course, if anyone is familiar. And that culvert falls almost exactly on the town line. And because of that, it's hard to know sort of which municipality, which DPW is really due to be taking responsibility for the undersized culvert and the flooding that results during large rainstorms. This project really presents an opportunity to bring those municipalities together with a third party that can really help us focus on solving the problem in a beneficial way for both communities and providing support in the design of those types of projects. Natick has been really lucky to be such a close partner with this project. And I really have enjoyed seeing how that work has impacted our community on a whole. We're using this project to help inform other grant projects that we're working on, like a natural solutions project with the Suasco watershed, since Natick is maybe lucky, maybe unfortunately split between two very substantial watersheds. And that can also serve as a problem for dealing with these sort of stormwater and floodwater mitigation efforts. Beaver Dam Brook, which runs through Framingham and Natick, takes quite a bit of runoff from the city center of Framingham, but eventually discharges into Lake Cochituate in Natick. So determining solutions that can be installed in one community but truly have a beneficial impact to both communities is something that this project really stands to have a positive benefit on. The community engagement part of it has really helped these municipalities, including Natick, reach a constituency that maybe we wouldn't have reached normally to discuss these types of issues. I'm looking forward to hopefully being with crew at the Natick Farmers Market at some point this spring to talk about this project and the flooding problems that Natick faces. But the tool has been really helpful in preparing our community to be the most climate resilient community that we can be, taking into account a very holistic view of different types of scenarios, the good and the bad, and how potentially what we do in our community may positively benefit another community in the watershed. CRWA has been a fantastic partner, and we are really looking forward to seeing the results of this third phase of the watershed model. And I know I'm maybe a little bit before my time, but hopefully that's not a bad thing, Dira. I'm going to pass things off to Lee, who is our crew representative this evening, to talk a little bit more about the truly exciting stuff, the community engagement.
Thank you, Claire. And actually in this transition too, and I don't know if it's helpful, I'm gonna share my screen because I do have a few slides that do include a slide with a poll question for you all. And so that poll question will come up at the same time that I start this. So this question is, in the past year, where have you most found refuge, inspiration, and or support? And this is a question you don't have to just pick one. So you choose as many as you connect with. If none come to mind, you can choose none. If you don't see any places listed that match what you have in mind, there are many, many places, right, that exist. So that would not be on this. This is not, this does not cover all places that exist. So feel free to just choose other if that's the case. And we'll give a few seconds here for people to share what they're connecting with today. Okay, awesome. So I'll give it maybe one more second. I think everyone's okay. Awesome. So in running this poll, this is not something that is intended to like pit places against each other or anything like that. It's really just to introduce another theme. I know Hartman had mentioned balance earlier, and actually had given some examples of stories and our connection to place. And so this is simply just to introduce a new theme into the conversation tonight, and one that is going to be a running theme in a lot of the engagement we're going to do in this next phase of the project. So again, intention is not to pit any places against each other, just help us understand the importance that place plays in our lives. Places are personal or shared. We derive great meaning and comfort from them. I think one reason we want to lift up place as well in this conversation is because humans tend to rely on places in a way that we don't rely on people. And this is very relevant to climate change, right? With people, we don't always know what we're going to get, while places offer a sense of grounding and continuity. And even if there is a change in a place, it's often at a slow enough pace, or it's a kind of change that we're familiar with, or even cyclical. And certainly climate change is having throwing that balance out of whack, right? It's increasing the kinds of changes we're seeing to places that we rely on to be able to go to, natural places, even places at home that are potentially disappearing, or again, evolving in such a pace that we can't keep up. I'm sorry, one second. Let me just, it went ahead one. There we go. Okay, so who am I? Yeah, good.
I don't think you're screen sharing if you are trying to screen share.
Okay. I don't know what happened. Sorry. Give me 1 second.
No worries.
Okay. Sorry about that. All right. So picking up where I was at. So again, just wanted to introduce myself and our team at Crew. So I'm Lee Munier. I'm coming from the eastern edge of the watershed, so in Somerville. I'm serving as the primary project coordinator for the Charles River Flood Model in connection with community engagement. I do also want to just quickly introduce, just by name, some of our team members that you might run into when we do these community events and some of these online meetings. Vernon, who's on the staff at Crew, Ian, Kiara, and Rohan, who are all students at either Tufts or MIT. So Crew relies a lot on our connections to local academic institutions to supply capacity and bring people into this process that have a lot of energy. Maybe it's another thing to just focus on again, as mentioned here, who is Crew in connection with the CRFM project? How are we going to be a partner? Clearly, community engagement coordination has been mentioned by several people here already. Other things that Crew is going to bring to this project and has continued to, and is actually the reason we've been called upon, is because a lot of the work that Crew does is in connection with justice and equity focused efforts. Another thing that Crew continues to do in these spaces when we're engaging with community, in addition to soliciting feedback on these priority projects that Julie mentioned, talking about green infrastructure, sharing the flood model, is Crew is also thinking about ways we can ensure we can get resources directly to people and connect people that we're talking with supportive systems as they need them. So one thing I just wanted to talk about real quick is just the word resilience, right? So this is a word that we hear over and over again and has kind of become like a buzzword. It's mentioned in Crew's mission statement, which was on the last slide. Coming back to our poll question, we often look to places to help us build our internal resilience. So a lot of the work that Cru will be doing in this next phase is thinking about resilience, and in part in connection with place. I think one of the things that's really tricky with place is, like I mentioned, when places are changing so quickly, our bodies, our hearts, our minds can't keep up. Place also has a powerful role in our ability to learn, to remember, and to care. And that's what I'll talk about in a minute, about how that's going to play into our engagement with communities in this phase. So one thing I do want to just lift up, which I noted a couple slides ago, was just about Cru's unique connection to flooding preparedness resources. So a couple of things to lift up here. One is a lot of Cru's work is actually in connection with place. So we think place is invaluable in climate preparedness efforts. When there is a crisis, people often turn to a place, whether that's a physical place or to some sort of institution. So one program that Cru has is something called Resilience Hubs. So Cru has basically built out a network both statewide, and we're also branching out nationally to think about what institutions or what organizations are already serving communities in some capacity, who already exists that community members turn to when there's a crisis. That's libraries, schools, faith organizations are a big one that Cru is uniquely tied to. We have a big interfaith summit, for instance, every May. So we really prioritize those kinds of relationships because that's where trust already exists. And that's going to be a really great connector to people in the community. Also want to just lift up a couple other resources here. I think Julia, if she hasn't already, we'll put these in the chat so you have access to them. The American Red Cross is a really excellent resource to go to if you wanted some tips and tools. So there's a couple links here to their resources, both in English and Spanish. And then also, if you want to get a deeper dive into understanding policy, social justice, and equity as more of a lens to how we plan to respond to disasters, the Center for Progressive Reform has a really great report from 2018 that's reflecting on flooding and lots of crises that occurred with a lot of the storm surges in 2017. So I do want to just devote a couple of minutes real quick to just explain some of the engagement that we've done so far in the last couple phases, again, in the last 2 years, as Julie mentioned, and how that's going to influence our next phase of engaging with communities. So phase one was all virtual. As people can remember or want to or don't want to remember, 2021, a lot of us were either a lot indoors, trying to keep physical distance, and it can be really tricky. And how can we think of those limitations as opportunities? So, what Cru did was engage in a lot of virtual connections. This was clearly informed by COVID. A lot of the work that we did was through broader geographic focus gatherings, so upper watershed, lower watershed kind of connections. The next phase, so 2022, last year, we were able to start moving back to in-person, and we wanted to do so gently. So what we really did was we followed the guidance of communities, right? Where were people slowly starting to come back together? A lot of those kinds of events are what you're seeing here. So, some Earth Day events, a family day that was happening in Medway, farmers markets, as Claire had referenced earlier. So those are the kinds of spaces we were coming to. So, the initial, and as noted here, some of those initial connections across these phases included a lot of trust building. As mentioned, meeting people where they're at. We wanted to develop relationships with city and town staff as we could. A lot of that was so that we can also be a resource throughout this project to them, and ideally co-create these engagement opportunities, right? We don't want to be pitted against people or be working in a silo. We want to work together with the municipal staff who are really caring about this kind of work. So again, speaking to this phase, right? So how is a lot of that work going to inform this phase? I already started to speak about this a little bit. You can see learnings and continued connection. So meeting people where they're at in person is, as we're learning, is definitely best. I think in addition to the virtual spaces that CRWA is creating, we're also going to keep our eyes open for other virtual opportunities that already exist and show up there. But for the most part, this next phase is going to be focused on in-person. And coming back to what I'd mentioned about place, we want to just make sure that the work we're doing, moving beyond existing events, like how can we really connect with place? So as mentioned here, we see Paddle Boston has locations all up and down the river. So we hope to make use of those locations to do some outreach. We also want to think about intersections of issues. So a lot of communities that are vulnerable to climate change also have other vulnerabilities. So we're thinking about partnerships with the Y and food pantries to get word out to. And I see Dira's lovely face. So maybe I'll just take one more second to just explain more specifically, when we are at some of these events, some things that we will be talking about, as Julie mentioned, just to reiterate, we'll be asking people about some of these green infrastructure projects. What excites you? Where do you want to see those? Bringing large scale versions of images of the model to help people understand what this actually looks like in their community. And then I think the last thing is just a takeaway question, which again, hopefully Julia will put in the chat, is just, we have a question for you all about engagement, right? What do you consider meaningful engagement? What ideas do you have for engaging, whether that's connections with place across issues that you could share with us so that we are showing up meaningfully with you all across the next year. And my contact info will be in the chat as well. So please don't hesitate to reach out to let us know who we need to engage with, where, and how. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Lee, and thank you to all of our speakers. Now we are going to be opening up this part of our webinar to questions from the audience. So if you haven't already, please feel free to drop in your questions in the Q&A box at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Thanks to those who have already submitted their questions. And I also see a lot of folks who have been using the chat function to engage with the hosts and panelists and share your resources as well. So that is really great. And I guess with that, I will open it up with the first question I see in the Q&A. And for the panelists, feel free to turn on your camera. I can assign some of the questions to you guys, or if there are just broader questions, maybe folks who want to add their input, feel free to do that. So one of the first questions I see in the Q&A, and maybe this is for you, Julie, is there a collaboration with Neponset River watershed in the area of Denham where the Charles River Dam feeds into Mother Brook?
Excellent question. This is setting me up really well if there's any funders on this webinar, because we are actively seeking funding to try to do that. No, that's a great question. For those that are not familiar, this is one of those relics of the past, but at a time when our economy really did rely on mills and rivers to turn them to kind of make our goods and services. The industrious folks of Massachusetts built a canal, a brook, to take water from the Charles, which has a good volume, to the Neponset, which has a good elevation drop. So the Charles is pretty flat, but we've got a good volume of water. Neponset, steep, but a little bit of water. So they decided to solve the problem by bringing water from the Charles to the Neponset. That still exists, and that way it would be more powerful. The mills on the Neponset would get more power. That still exists today, but obviously we don't run on mills, power on mills anymore, but it still exists. The Department of Conservation and Recreation, Massachusetts DCR, does use it to some extent for flood control. But I'll just say it's really not understood, you know, how well is it working? How much does it have the capacity to improve? Can we do some real-time, you know, moving real-time management if, you know, flooding exists in one area, not in another? So while it was a solution for a long ago problem, Can it potentially be repurposed for the problem we face today, which is climate change? Or is it something that should no longer be there? So that's kind of an open question that we are hoping to find funding with our partners at the Neponset River Watershed Association, who have followed in our footsteps and built a similar model and a similar regional group, a question we'd all like to answer together.
Great, thank you, Julie. And I guess while I still have you, another question that came in through the Q&A is about whether or not Boston is engaged with community groups, and I assume in terms of our community engagement. So maybe you could clarify on the extent and regional frame of the flood model and which communities we are and aren't actually working with.
Yeah, so Boston actually is engaged with our project, even though if folks were listening extremely closely, you might have heard me mention that our flood model footprint is actually for the sections upstream of Boston. The reason that is because Boston had already invested the resources in building their own citywide model. For the smaller communities, those resources just weren't there. So it really did make sense for us all to band together and do it together. However, what we learn about the upstream area is what goes down into Boston. So, you know, again, it's back to Hartman's opening story, the upstream and the downstream connection. So yeah, so Boston, the municipal staff there have actually been really engaged and good partners on this. And then we also, I think, have done some engagement there too, Lee, as well. I don't know if you want to talk more about that.
Yeah, sure. So maybe to the first piece, or the direct question of engaging with Boston government, one way that I can say that we have crew specifically with this project is reaching out to them for flooding and climate preparedness materials, and to be in dialogue with them about what we can bring to whether it's Boston oriented events or watershed wide. So what maybe either Julie, if you're able to find it, or I will, when I stop speaking, find the link to Climate Ready Boston, which is being built out by the city, but they are a really great resource and are looking to develop resources over time. That creating toolkits for emergencies is a good example of something that we have borrowed from the city and made accessible to people when we've been out with community members. And then to Julie, your question about ways we've engaged so far, I'd say the main way that, crew is engaged with the city of Boston and other Boston groups all the time on other projects. I mentioned that Interfaith Summit that we have is often held in Boston. And I'd say one way that we are going to be in Boston, ideally in phase 3, will be through groups like the YMCA. So that's another way we hope to show up and catch, you know, families and as many people. So it's kind of like although the YMCA is not a Boston government entity, you know, still has roots in Boston neighborhoods, and they themselves also have strong connections to municipal staff. So, yeah.
And I was still on mute. You would think we would know how to use Zoom. Okay. Some other, again, just a reminder, if you have any questions, please utilize the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. I also have some questions lined up for some of our other panelists, and I have a question, I guess. Claire, if you could, I guess, share some insights on what has been the most useful information that's been shared through the Climate Compact, which I think is, you know, it's not every town and city has, you know, are part of a regional collaboration. So what have been some of the pluses that that NATIC has been able to gain from this collaboration?
Yeah, I think NATIC has been sort of very uniquely benefited by this situation because of the fact that it has been such a prominent part of our community for the last year and a half or so. is a dam removal project on the Charles River. I think this tool was a really great support for a lot of the discussions that were happening around that project, and was the climate resiliency and environmental ecological health impacts of dam removal were one of the committee's sort of top priorities when determining whether or not we were going to remove the dam. And this tool was one of many that we used to really support the idea that the removal of the dam truly was the best option when it came to environmental and ecological sort of climate impacts. That area of the Charles is at the confluence of a number of sort of very large streams that run throughout town. Davis Brook, Indian Brook, and Coarse Brook all sort of enter the Charles in that area. So there is a potential for a lot of flooding impacts from development in the area of the watershed. So using this tool to help inform the stormwater bylaw changes that we're hoping to push through this year and really beef up the resiliency that we see across our community, using this tool as a resource to help support why we're looking to make those changes. I could probably go on for an hour about all of the ways that we use the tool, but I will keep it there. We've been so lucky to be a partner on this project, and I've really loved being able to use the model as a tool to help us.
Great, thanks for sharing. All right, I see a number of questions coming in. This is great. All right, so one of the other questions that came up is whether or not, or how much is the Army Corps of Engineers involved with the group? Maybe Julie, you could take on and talk a little bit about the design and the computer aspects of the project.
Yes, another timely one. The Army Corps is doing a study, or just starting a study focused on the new Charles River Dam, which is at the end of the Charles, between the Charles and the harbor. It's all the way at the end down in Charlestown. And so we have been talking with them about that study. They're, quite interested to see, what our assumptions were, just sort of some of the technical pieces of our modeling work. And then hopefully we'll also be able to have some overlap with them with, the types of scenarios they look at and we look at, but they're just kind of kicking off that study. So, so that's one very direct piece of overlap. Someone, I know the chat is not public, but someone in the chat did mention the Natural Valley storage area. And I just wanted to super quickly mention that the Natural Valley storage area is a flood solution from the 1970s and 80s that we really would like to learn from and replicate essentially through this process. The Natural Valley storage area is unique in an Army Corps flood control project. It does not involve levees. It does not involve canals. It does not involve hardscape. Quite the opposite. It involved preserving 8,300 acres of natural wetlands in the middle and upper watershed. And those are still protected today. As I said, this is dating back to the 70s and 80s when these were identified, acquired, and protected, and they still remain protected today. And it works, basically. It works to hold that water upstream, to allow space for that water, for those wetlands to serve as a sponge and hold more water when it's wet, slowly release it downstream, has been shown to really protect the downstream areas of the watershed, Boston, Cambridge, and other areas. So that, what we're looking at, it's not new. I mean, I think we got that from Hartman's story. A lot of this is really not new. We're just, needing to think about how to apply it and like I said, to get started. Long answer.
No, these are really great answers. Okay, some other questions coming in through the Q&A box. Someone has asked about some folks living along, apartments. We have in our watershed, we have a lot of apartments along the river. Question is regarding who's actually keeping track of the river's flooding levels to protect people living in and around those areas. This question is specifically around Waltham, but maybe Julie and Claire, maybe you both have some insight on, for each town or city, how does it work? Who's keeping track of that? And maybe for residents, who would they need to contact if they have questions like this?
Yeah, I mean, another great question. So in the past, we've relied a lot on FEMA and FEMA flood maps. And FEMA makes these maps, puts lines on a map. This is where we think it's going to flood. If your building is in this area, you need to get flood insurance. And so that's essentially how it's worked for a long time. If you're outside this map, you don't need to get flood insurance. It's become pretty obvious in recent years, if not decades, that that doesn't really work. Flooding happens in lots of areas outside of flood zones. And so it's a problem. And really, a lot of local municipalities really are kind of stepping up to help with that, to look at where the flooding is and what's happening. And obviously that's what this project is all about. But Claire, do you want to add in on the local piece?
Yeah, I think if folks have questions about flooding in their area or whether their property is at risk, I would highly recommend reaching out to your town's conservation agent or conservation administrator if you have one. If not, the Department of Public Works might be able to assist you through their engineering division. As a conservation agent myself, I'm always happy to talk with folks about whether or not they may fall in a FEMA flood region, or whether or not they may be in an area that may be at risk for isolated flooding related to wetlands or streams. And I would also double check to make sure that your community either does or does not have a local flood bylaw. There are a number of communities, Newton is one of them, that has a local flood bylaw that identifies smaller potential flood zones around streams that may or may not be mapped by FEMA. And the flood model is generally being used on sort of a larger community scale, but there are a number of sort of mapping tools. Mass Mapper is a state GIS system that you can use to sort of look at what we refer to in sort of the conservation industry as the FEMA blobs, which are the maps that Julie mentioned, the sort of larger areas that are mapped by FEMA. And you might also just want to ask your local conservation agent or town engineer whether or not the town is aware of any history of flooding on sites. If there is sort of a regular repeated influence of flooding on an area, the town may have records about that, even if those areas are outside of FEMA floodplains. So definitely use your town as a resource to try and find out as much information as you can.
May I also field this question? Yeah, and part of the reason I wanted, it's actually a very appropriate question. I think Barbara, you also are mentioning the mill specifically, and I want to respond to it because this is actually a really good example of why we're talking for this next phase to focus on place-based. If people are not familiar with where the mill is, it's right on the river, and the flooding that my understanding that occurs there, having spoken with others who know residents at the mill, it's already experiencing flooding, right? It's impacting people already. It's not a future thing. So, and my understanding is the strong housing for people who are more vulnerable. So elders in our community. And it's also, the way in which I actually know this is through this intersectional work. So it's groups like Healthy Waltham, local food pantries who are reaching people, who highly recommended that our team connect with the mill specifically. So in this phase, we're thinking about place. We want to go and think about the built environment, residents living right on the river and talking with them. So last year, we already talked with the programs coordinator at the mill, and our hope is in this phase to actually go to the mill and talk with residents directly, and to use that also as a model for doing that with others in other municipalities along the Charles and its tributaries.
Great, thank you everyone for your answers. And I also do want to highlight, just back to the question, there are other ways for you to check out, what the flood risk or what the flood areas could be in your neighborhood, including the flood model that we have. So you can check out the interactive map to see where your neighborhood is and what the risks are for various different projections of flooding. And most of the or all the towns in our watershed also have an MVP report, which also includes, assessing risk from climate change